So today it's determining sequence, and it's basically building on those same ideas about summarizing, finding information, finding the main points, finding supporting details and stuff like that. So this lesson, like it says, we're going to be defining the term sequence. Uh, Here's the point that I really want to stress: identify transition words, and we put events in chronological order. But this idea here, identify transition words. So in a larger sort of idea here is signal words. There's going to be certain phrases and words that we'll see that are getting ready to tell us something. They're going to, in this case, since we're dealing with sequence, we're going to see, stuff like, first, secondly, or lastly, are all signal words to tell us, the order of events and how things are falling. Or, those transition words, like we already talked about, nevertheless, however, but all sort of signal a contrast. Moreover, furthermore, as signaling, additional information. And then you'll have others, stuff related to time, which is more about sequence and placing stuff in order. All right, so let's go on here into our lesson and our little audio clip.
A passage's sequence is the order in which events or steps occur. Following events in chronological or time order is important to help you understand the relationships between these events. Following steps in sequence will help you understand a process. For example, if you understand the order of events in a newspaper story, you will be better able to analyze how one event may have led to another. Similarly, if you follow the steps in changing a tire, you will do the job correctly. If an author does not use dates or numbers, he or she may use signal or transition words, such as first, next, then, and finally. Signal words may indicate chronological order or a series of steps. Identifying signal words can help you follow or order sequence.
Yeah, so just like I was saying, you look for those signal words, and signal and transition words, they don't just apply to sequence. Like I was saying, they apply to contrast, adding information, time frame, all of those kind of things can be used as signal or transition words. And that's what we're doing here. We're building on that idea. So we're starting here with a sequence to start looking at signal words and transition words, and then we'll move on and we'll start adding to that idea with other types of signal and transition words. So let's see here. Yep, we've got a little text, and okay. Go ahead and read that, and then we'll get to the text box. So here we're talking about the scientific method, right? Just like before, we want to make sure that we take note of the title of a piece that we're reading. And then we say what we think of today as the steps of science have developed over time, and they may differ according to the type of investigation being conducted. Generally, though, the steps involve making an observation. Forming a hypothesis, conducting a test, and making a conclusion. Scientific investigations usually begin with an observation that points to an interesting question. One famous example of an observation that led to further investigation was made by Scottish biologist Alexander Fleming in the 1920s. After an absence from his lab, he returned and began to clean some glass plates in which he had been growing a certain kind of bacteria. He noticed an odd thing. One of the plates had become contaminated by mold. Curiously, the area around the mold looked free of bacterial growth. His observation indicated that a causal relationship might exist. The mold, or a substance produced by the mold, might prevent bacterial growth. Fleming's observation led to a series of scientific tests that resulted in new knowledge. Penicillin could be used to treat bacterial infections. And that's from the historyofvaccines.org, an article on the scientific method in vaccine history, 2013. And then our two little text boxes here. So when the author refers to the steps of science, you should expect a sequence to be described. So as you read, try numbering the steps in the sequence. Right, so that's one of the signal words that we're looking here for, steps. Okay, what we know it's going to follow is a sequence of items. And then secondly, in our other text box, notice the signal words such as after, began, and led to. These can help you determine the sequence of events of the passage. So once again, two different types of sort of signal words. This one in the middle of a sentence that's preparing you to, see a sequence, and after, began, which are basically guiding you through that sequence, right? So after an absence from his lab, he returned and began to clean some glass plates. And then farther down here, Fleming observations led to a series of scientific tests. So that kind of cause and effect, helping guide your order there, the sequence of events. Okay, this is some directions for the next section, but I'll go ahead and play them. It's basically on how we're going to use drag and drop. You're going to see a lot of drag and drop types of questions and answers, throughout the course. So let's go ahead and play that. This also is relevant because I think our quiz deals with some of the information here.
The quiz that follows this lesson contains a drag and drop item. To answer drag and drop items, you will need to read the question carefully and then use your mouse to select and drag an answer into a graphic, such as a chart, diagram, or image. Let's practice with an item from the lesson quiz. This question asks you to drag and drop the events into the chart to show the order in which they occur in the passage. It is important to understand that these events form a chronology. To start, we should select the event that happened first. In order to complete this item, we need to skim the passage for time signal words, such as first or next, or for references to specific years or months. In the passage, we see the following time signal words: in 1964, in October, in the spring, in April, and the next day. We can tell that the passage tells about events that happened during the 1964-1965 school year. Out of the 4 choices given, rehearsals for the Christmas play begin is the event that happens the earliest. After skimming the passage again, we see that the author is shifted to a 4th grade class is the next event that happened in this sequence. The author reads poetry to his students is the event listed that happened next. If we skim the passage again, we see that the last event, the author is fired, happened last. Now that I have determined the order of events, we will drag and drop each statement into the appropriate box. Rehearsals for the Christmas play begin goes into the first box. Second is, the author is shifted to a 4th grade class. For the third box, we will drag and drop the author reads poetry to his students. We drag and drop the author is fired into the last box. If at any point during the process of dragging and dropping I had made a mistake, I could click on the reset button to clear the answers already placed. Here, all the answer choices are placed correctly, so I will hit the submit button.
Yep, that's all there is to it. The one thing I'll point out, like you mentioned, if you make a mistake, you have to reset. Unfortunately, from my experience on the Steck Bond stuff, you can't, like if I drop something in the wrong spot, you can't pick it back up and move it. So you actually have to reset it. So keep that in mind as you're dragging and dropping things. And then I believe, we move over to the quiz now. We'll have a few questions there. So let me go ahead. Next activity. Moving on to student book, lesson 3 quiz. All right. Everybody get caught up here. go ahead and open it. Let's start. Fortunately, it brought us to the top of the screen, not somewhere down the middle. And we're back on the scientific method, right? So we saw this before. This is, yeah, it's the same passage. So we'll go ahead and look at the questions. And if we need to reread anything, we will. Anyway, so some test taking tips here. So when you're taking this on a computer-based or taking the computer-based test, use the electronic highlighting feature. The highlight sequence words will help you follow the order of steps or events. That's one of the tools that's going to be available when you're taking your test. You can actually highlight things. All right. So according to the passage, which step in the scientific, that should be scientific method, occurs before forming a hypothesis? So A, conducting a test, B, making an observation, C, reaching a conclusion, or D, gaining new knowledge. And I think we can look back up at the very first paragraph there. Right. Generally, though, the steps involve making an observation, forming a hypothesis, conducting a test, and making a conclusion. So what do we do before forming a hypothesis?
Is it B?
B. Yeah, B as in boy.
Yeah.
We make an observation. Correct. So number one is B. Okay, now we get into that drag and drop. And I'll go ahead and read through the passage here. It's
I don't know where y'all at.
On the quiz?
Yeah, student book, lesson 3, determine sequence, quiz. If you're on the home page, it'll be the second part of lesson 2. Make sure it's scrolled up to the top. Again, running that problem where it's starting, at the bottom or in the middle sometimes. All right. Okay, so on to the drag and drop. I'll start reading here. So title, again, always, no matter what we're doing, make a note of the title, Inequalities in America's Schools. I had begun to teach in 1964 in Boston in a segregated school, so crowded, so poor, that I could not provide my 4th grade children with a classroom. We shared an auditorium with another 4th grade and the choir and a group that was rehearsing, starting in October for a Christmas play that somehow never was produced. In the spring, I was shifted to another 4th grade that had a string of substitutes all year. The 35 children in the class hadn't had a permanent teacher since they entered kindergarten. That year, I was their 13th teacher. The results were seen in the first test I gave. In April, most were reading at the 2nd grade level. Their math ability was at the 1st grade level. In an effort to resuscitate their interest, I began to read them poetry I liked. They were drawn especially to poems of Robert Frost and Langston Hughes. One of the most embittered children in the class began to cry when she first heard the words of Langston Hughes. The next day, I was fired. There was, it turned out, a list of 4th grade poems that teachers were obliged to follow, but which, like most first-year teachers, I had never seen. So that's an excerpt from Savage Inequalities, Children in America's Schools by Jonathan Kozol. All right, and well, I think we've seen this before. They didn't make it too hard on us. So we're only got 4 options this time. We're going to put this in the order of events, right? What we encountered first, and we go straight through to the bottom. So which of those events did we encounter first in the passage?
The author is shifted.
Yep, the author is shifted to a 4th grade class.
And then rehearsals for Christmas play begin.
Not yet.
Okay. The author reads the poetry to his students.
Yes, that's next. This is kind of hard because I don't have a full, I don't have enough screen. I guess I could make it real small, but I don't like doing that either. And then process of elimination, what will be next?
The author is fired.
Oh, we do the rehearsals first, right?
Reverse for the Christmas play.
Yes. Yeah. Rehearsals for the Christmas play. And then he's fired. Right. That caps it off. And hit submit. Oh, wait. What happened?
I don't know.
I
Mine
get
won't
one.
let me take the answers off.
Oh, I messed up. Gosh, I am not doing
I
well
did the
here.
same thing.
Shoot. Okay, he shifted. He reads poetry. What's going on here? No. Oh, the rehearsals are first. Ah, geez. I'm so sorry. That's my fault. That's my fault. I knew that. I actually answered it last night and wrote it down, and I skipped writing down rehearsals, and I started with the shifted classrooms. So yeah, sorry about that, folks. It's rehearsals are first. So rehearsals for the Christmas play, then the author is shifted to a fourth grade class. It's just basically, you just gotta, rehearsals for the Christmas play, start at the top, everything else follows through. And that's why I only got the one green box. Man, I am struggling with this stuff. Yeah, I did it all last night. I try to do my prep, the night before, and I do them blind. So I make sure that, I'm on the right page with everything. But then I go back, I check my answers and make sure everything's correct. So when I wrote it down, I realized I just had 3 boxes here. I just had the shifted classes, reads poetry, and fired. I forgot to write down the rehearsals at the top. Okay. Anyhow, we're going to move on to the workbook now. I think we have 4 or 5 workbook exercises for that. So once you submit your answers. Unfortunately for me, there's going to be some wrong answers again. Let's go to the next activity. Okay. Now this should take you into the workbook. So it should be workbook, lesson 3, determine sequence. And, same sort of information there. You look for those keywords, you look for signal words, transition words, first, next, later, after, and finally. You look for dates, time frames. So like in that one, it's progressing through the months. So you can look for things like, well, this happened in October, and then this happened in April, all of which will help you with the sequence. Okay. And this passage, more on science. So the text boxes say, knowing the order of events can help you understand how the scientist tested his hypothesis. And the second one, words again, such as later, indicate steps forward in the timeline of a text. The signal word tells you which step comes after another step. And, this again is related to the idea of summarizing, right? Knowing the order of events is going to help you correctly summarize something, because you're going to need that skill to correctly summarize something and make sure it makes sense to your reader or who you're speaking to. So at the top here, right, the discovery of the smallpox vaccine. Again, taking note of the title. Here, Edward Jenner, born in England in 1749, is one of the most famous physicians in medical history. Jenner tested the hypothesis that the infection with cowpox could protect a person from smallpox infection. Jenner is said to have been interested in the observation of a dairymaid. She told him, "I shall never have smallpox, for I have had cowpox. I shall never have an ugly pockmarked face." And many other dairy workers commonly believe that infection with cowpox protected them from smallpox. Jenner scratched some material from a cowpox sore on the hand of a milkmaid into the arm of an 8-year-old James Phipps, the son of Jenner's gardener. Young Phipps felt poorly for several days, but he made a full recovery. A short time later, there's our signal, Jenner scratched some matter from a fresh human smallpox sore into Phipps's arm in an attempt to make him ill with smallpox. Phipps, however, did not contract smallpox. Jenner went on to test his idea on other humans and published a report of his findings. So yeah, there's the development of the smallpox vaccine. So we'll look down here and have a few questions. Oh, no, next activity. Whoa, no. Start. Woo, almost messed up there. So hit start. That will take us into the workbook, right? And there's our passage again. And so making assumptions. So it says, do not assume that authors always write in chronological order. You have to make sure that very often they skip around. Pay close attention to signal words to help you determine the order in which events occurred. Yes, you can also run into that, right? Where they kind of move and shift in time. So you have to be conscious of that and look for those signal words as you're working through an exam. Okay, so here, what was the first step in Jenner's investigation? Did he test the hypothesis that cowpox protects from smallpox? Was it a dairymaid told him why she wouldn't get smallpox? Was it Phipps that made a full recovery from cowpox, or was it people who had cowpox did not become ill with smallpox?
A.
B. Right before he tested the hypothesis, he got the idea because a dairymaid told him she was never going to get smallpox because she had had cowpox. So B as in boy. Okay. The other thing that's cool, since these go hand in hand, thinking about the scientific method, and you guys might encounter that with Rachel in your class, but that's an order of events. So it's a good text to understand to help with us explain order of events, because you do a certain way, you do things in a certain way in science, you want to do things a certain way to analyze them in language arts. Okay, same passage for question 2. So Jenner waited until Phipps recovered before infecting him with smallpox. Why was the waiting period between steps important? He had to get a smallpox sample. He was testing his idea on other humans. He wanted to allow time for the vaccine to work, or D, he waited until Phipps had recovered from smallpox. That's the correct answer there.
7, correct, 7, 3.
So answer C, right? And a little bit of common sense there too, right? Because we know if you get a vaccine, it takes a while for you to build up the antibodies for it to work. And the process of elimination with that, well, he didn't have smallpox, right? So he didn't have to recover from it. So we can eliminate D. And then simple order of events, right? He had given Phipps the inoculation for smallpox. Before he could test it, he needed to wait. And that's found right here, right? In that second sentence, young Phipps felt poorly for several days, but made a full recovery. A short time later, Jenner scratched some material from human smallpox sore into Phipps's arm. So he needed to wait for the vaccine to work. C. Right, that's why they always ask you when you get a vaccine, are you feeling okay today? Because if you're sick, it's not going to go so well if you get vaccinated. All right, new passage. So talking about Colin Powell, who recently passed away. So Colin L. Powell was appointed Secretary of State by George W. Bush on January 20th, 2001, after being unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate. He served for 4 years, leaving the position on January 26, 2005. He was the first African American to serve as Secretary of State. Powell was born on April 5th, 1937, in the New York City neighborhood of Harlem. The son of two Jamaican immigrants, he was raised in the South Bronx. He attended City College of New York, and it was there that he began his military service, joining the Reserve Officer Training Corps. After his graduation in 1958, Powell was commissioned a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. During his 35 years in the Army, he served 2 tours in Vietnam, was stationed in West Germany and South Korea, and acted as President Ronald Reagan's National Security Advisor from 1987 until 1989. In 1989, he was promoted to the rank of general and was appointed by President H.W. Bush to the position of Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The 4 years Powell served in that capacity, he oversaw 28 crises, including Operation Desert Storm in 1991. After his retirement in 1993, he founded America's Promise, an organization that helps at-risk children. He was nominated for Secretary of State by President George W. Bush on December 16, 2000. And last paragraph here, influence on U.S. diplomacy. At the beginning of his term, Powell placed an emphasis on reaffirming diplomatic alliances throughout the world, supporting a national missile defense, working towards peace in the Middle East, and prioritizing sanctions instead of force in potential hotspots such as Iraq. He also focused on reinvigorating U.S. diplomacy through reforms in Department of State's organizational culture and an infusion of resources for personnel, information technology, security, and facilities. Powell's term, however, was soon dominated by the challenges the Bush administration faced after the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attack. And that's from the state.gov website, and it's a biography of Colin Powell. So now we're going to have to order some events here, drag and drop. So which one of these was first here? He serves as JCS. He's founds America's Promise, appoints Powell, Bush appoints Powell as Secretary of State, or Powell serves as National Security Advisor.
George W. Bush appoints Powell as Secretary of State.
Nope, not yet.
That's the last one. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want to mention here too, if you feel confident about something something that happens last, you can go ahead and put it there, right? And it'll be a placeholder. You don't have to worry about it. Then you have less to look at elsewise. So I'm going to go ahead and put that. George W. Bush appoints Powell as Secretary of State. So that's our last one.
So Powell serves as National Security Advisor?
Yes, that's the first one, right? Serves
Yeah.
as Ronald Reagan. And, here we if you're thinking about order events, this is one too. We talked about authors, right? So the very first paragraph, we're talking about 2001. It starts discussing the last position that he held as Secretary of State. So, we have to get those clues from, dates, January 2001, down here 2005. But of course, when we start seeing his other positions with Reagan from 87 to 89, right? So that way we're clued in. We know to drop Powell serve as the NSA as at least for this purpose was his first role. Okay, and then what was next?
The Powell found the Americans Promise.
Nope, he's appointed Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's going to be next. Yeah, this. So he founds America's Promise sort of in the period where he served the two Bushes, right? So he was Daddy Bush's Joint Chiefs of Staff. Served as the chairman of the JCS through the first Gulf War. That period 90-91. And then, he didn't have any, public roles really. So he founded America's Promise. And then when George W. Bush is elected, he comes back into, as a public figure and is nominated as Secretary of State. So Yeah, what we want there is National Security Advisor, Chairman of Joint Chief of Staff, founder of America's Promise, and then George W. Bush appoints Powell as Secretary of State. And I'm double checking this before I hit submit. And I know this already because I studied military history, but just in case. Yes, that's all right. Okay. So, all right, that one's good to go. So on to number 4. Okay, and another passage to read. So, we're going to look for those, look for dates and then look for those signal words so we can see order of events. All right, so since October 1987, when the city's garbage pickups ceased, the backyards of residents have been employed as dump sites. In the spring of 1988, a policeman tells a visitor that 40 plastic bags of trash are waiting for removal from the backyard of his mother's house. Public health officials are concerned the garbage will attract a plague of flies and rodents in the summer. The policeman speaks of rats as big as puppies in his mother's yard. They are known to residents, he says, as bull rats. Many people have no cars or funds to cart the trash and simply burn it in their yards. The odor of smoke from burning garbage, says the Post-Dispatch, has become one of the scents of spring in East St. Louis. In March of 1989, a task force appointed by Governor James Thompson notes that the city was in debt by more than $40 million and proposed emergency state loans to pay for garbage collection and to keep police and fire departments in continued operation. The governor, however, blamed the mayor and his administrators, almost all of whom were Black, and refused to grant loans unless the mayor resigned. Thompson's response, said a Republican state legislator, made my heart feel good. It's unfortunate, but the essence of the problem in East St. Louis is the people who are running things. The dangers of exposure to raw sewage, which backs up repeatedly into homes of residents of East St. Louis, were first noticed in the spring of 1989 at a public housing project, Villa Griffin. Raw sewage, says the Post-Dispatch, overflowed into a playground just behind the housing project, which is home to 187 children, forming an oozing lake of tainted water. 2 schoolgirls, we are told, experienced hair loss since raw sewage flowed into their homes. All right. So, and I think actually that's like a continuous problem with St. Louis is their garbage pickup. So, moving on here, order of events, right? What is the sequence? This one, we actually have a timeline to follow. That's going to help us. So whatever happened in 87, 88, 89, and the 2 events in 89. So looking at that, what was the first event that occurred in 1987?
The garbage pickup cases?
Yes, the city's, yep, it ceased. Very first thing we see, right? Since October 87, the city's garbage pickup ceased. So good.
Cases.
Okay, and then what's the next one?
A policeman tells a visitor that 40 bags of trash is waiting for removal.
Yeah, that's 1988, right? So in the spring, and right, that's all of our signal words there. So October 87, spring of 98. So we're moving forward. Policeman tells visitors that 40 bags of trash are waiting for removal. And what's next?
Emergency state loans are proposed to pay for the garbage collection.
There you go. That's in early 89. And that leaves us the 1. And again, you could work backward or forward if you feel comfortable, that something is boom, this happens last, right? There's no issue with you, going backwards if you feel comfortable with that. So that's the correct order there. So the city's garbage pickups cease. The policeman tells a visitor about 40 bags of trash from his mother's backyard. Then we see emergency state loans are proposed to pay for garbage collection. And then finally, right in that last paragraph, we hear about raw sewage overflowing into a playground. And this all ties into that idea about summarizing, right? Order of events and things like that. And one final one here. So here we're getting a little civics lesson today too. How a bill originating in the House of Representatives becomes a law. So going to be a whole sequence of events here that we need to think about. So a bill is formed, a bill is the form used for most legislation, whether permanent or temporary, general or special, public or private. The bill is assigned its legislative number by the clerk and referred to the appropriate committee. It is during committee action that the most intense consideration is given to the proposed measures. This is also the time when the people are given the opportunity to be heard. Each piece of legislation is referred to the committee that has jurisdiction over the area affected by the measure. After hearings are completed, the bill is considered in a session that is popularly known as the markup session. Members of the committee study the viewpoints presented in detail. Amendments may be offered to the bill, and the committee members vote to accept or reject these things. At the conclusion of a deliberation, a vote of committee or subcommittee members is taken to determine what action to take on the measure. If the committee votes to report a bill, the committee report is written. This report describes the purpose and the scope of the measure and the reasons for recommended approval. The full House then debates the bill. After all debate is concluded and amendments decided upon, the House is ready to vote on final passage. After a measure passes in the House, it goes to the Senate for consideration. After a measure has been passed in identical form by both the House and Senate, it is considered enrolled. It is sent to the president, who may sign the measure into law, veto it, and return it to Congress. Let it become law without signature, or at the end of a session, pocket veto it. Okay, so now we have a little bit longer, right? We have 6 events here to put in order. So what's happening first there in the process of a bill becoming law?
The bill is referred to a committee?
Yes. The bill is referred to a committee.
And then the committee holds the hearing on the bill?
Committee holds the hearings on the bill. Very good.
And then the committee votes to report the bill?
Very good.
And then the House votes to pass the bill?
Yep.
And
yep.
then the senator votes to pass the bill, and then it goes to the president.
There you go. Perfect. So there's your civics lesson for the day too. This is probably going to come up in social studies at some point. So yeah, we went right to it. Again, when I was looking at this last night, I was like, well, I know the last thing is going to be the president signs the bill into law, right? And I know it goes to the Senate after it goes to the House. So again, you can kind of work backwards through those things. The first 3 are more a little bit of a technical, side of it. So you have to know which order there. But just to recap this one, the bill is referred to a committee. The committee holds hearings on the bill, votes to report the bill. The House votes to pass it. The Senate votes to pass it. And then the president is going to sign it into law or veto it or what have you. And, again, we see some of those signal words. I was trying to point those out, after, at the conclusion, after a measure. We keep hearing after. So, those are things you can look for if you're, if this comes up on a test and you have to do a sequence like that. So, okay. Yeah, and that is all for sequence. All right. So it's going to be a short day today. I'm not going to get too far ahead because social studies doesn't take as long. And, once we get through social studies, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.